Welcome to Business Talk, a global podcast series where we bring you closer to some of the world's most distinguished scholars and their impactful ideas. I'm Deepak, your host from India. It is a privilege and honor to host Professor Mordecai Kurz on Business Talk. Professor Mordecai Kurz is a John Kenny Professor of Economics Emeritus at Stanford University and a leading figure in modern economic theory. His scholarship spans a wide range of foundational areas, including neoclassical growth theory, generational equilibrium, game theory, and income distribution, complemented by significant empirical contributions. Over a distinguished career, Professor Kurz has shaped intellectual discourse through both pioneering research and influential publications. His books include Public Investment, The Rate of Return, and Optimal Fiscal Policy, and Endogenous Economic Fluctuations, studying in the theory of relational belief, the latter advancing a novel framework for understanding economic dynamics under uncertainty. From 1969 to 1989, he served as a director of economics at Stanford's Institute for Mathematical Studies in the Social Sciences, where he played a central role in fostering interdisciplinary research at the intersection of economics and mathematics. His work continues to inform contemporary debates on market behavior, expectations, and macroeconomic instability. In today's episode, we welcome Professor Kurz to discuss his new book, Private Power and Democracy's Decline: How to Make Capitalism Support Democracy. Building on his 2023 book, The Market Power of Technology, Dr. Kurz traces how contracted tech monopolies have driven income inequality and social polarization, threatening democracy itself. He also offers policy fixes from taxing monopoly profits to reforming antitrust law to help capitalism and democracy coexist. Professor Kurz, we are truly delighted and honored to have you on Business Talk. The honor without
Thank,
question is entirely ours. A warm welcome.
thank you for having me.
Thank you. Professor, you make bold claim in the book. You can have democracy and you can have free market capitalism, but you cannot have them both. What was the intellectual turning point that led you to this conclusion?
Oh, to understand this, you have to go back to the beginning of my research on this entire question, and to understand that, let me say that throughout the 20th century, economists believed that the proportion of income that goes to workers and the proportion of income that goes to capital, these are fixed quantities. Nobody understood why it would be so, but it was taken to be a fixed, like a natural condition, natural number. Keynes calls that the great miracle of economic statistics. And what happens towards the end of the 20th century is more and more data became available. And in 2003, Piketty and Saez wrote a very important article published in the Journal of Economics, Economic Journal, Quarterly Journal of Economics in 2003, in which they showed that this is not the case, that indeed these proportions do change. And in fact, the proportion of income that goes to workers went down for about 20 or 30 years already. This changed completely our view of income distribution. And the question is why? What determines income distribution then? And I got very interested in this subject and spent some years looking at the data and digging. And I came to the conclusion that the usual explanation that was given was not good. The typical explanation was given to the change of income distribution like it was part of the internal dynamics of economics, like the prices of capital goods declined, therefore people were accumulating more capital, and therefore the relative share of labor and capital was changing. this is sort of related relative prices to relative shares. This was unconvincing theory. And my analysis showed me that the greatest change that was occurring was the rise in monopoly profits. Monopoly profits means profits were obtained by having monopoly power. But that means that income distribution will be determined mostly by power considerations. Who has more power? Whether labor unions or workers or capitalists or people, different organizations. In other words, it had to do more with the ability to control things, to have power over the economic system. This is the core of what I have done for the last 15 years. And once you realize that it is economic power that matters, well, economic power is also political power. Economic inequality is also political inequality. So the question of where democracy goes becomes a natural question that arises from this kind of thinking. And this is the answer to your question.
Professor Adam Smith imagined a capitalism of competitive markets and dispersed power. How has technology fundamentally altered that vision? And why does it inevitably produce monopolies rather than competition it promises?
Well, now you're asking me to come and explain the core point. So this is a very central point that permeates everything. And to understand that is, think about it this way. If you have an innovation, it gives you more productivity, it increases output, it benefits. But it also gives the innovator, the owner of this technology has power over other competitors, because the competitors cannot use the technology. Because if technology becomes private property, if the information and technological knowledge becomes private information, privately owned, then I will have more power than my competitors because I have a better technology, which means that the actual process of innovations increases productivity and benefits humanities, but at the same time, it creates centers of economic power. Now, you'll say, well, but ultimately the patents expire and power goes away. But it's not so simple, because companies that have developed this power, initial power, then find ways of building upon it. So there are many, many ways to do that. Number one is you have second innovation after the first one on top of each other. So you've got a pyramid of innovations built on each other, again, making it hard for a competitor to enter. If a competitor enters with new technology, you buy them out, you acquire your competitors, or you acquire their technology, or you create conditions that make it impossible for them to have supplies, or you intimidate them in some other ways. And there are many, many strategies that have been developed, and the most noted ones, the ones that came up in the case of Microsoft, the trial of Microsoft, where the idea of tying and bundling products, like I have a central product and then I build another product which is connected to it, but it is the only way you can use it is by using the previous technology. So the technologies are interdependent. In addition to that, in the digital age, scale matters. So if an innovator has an initial position that that wins the race at the beginning, then it develops scale of information, scale of power. So a competitor must come in with a big scale, otherwise the marginal cost, the production cost, the extra cost to produce one more unit becomes cheaper for the firm that is already in the industry. And the innovator has more information than the newcomer. In other words, there are many, many advantages that firms use to consolidate power so that over time it becomes impossible to replace them. And ultimately, this market power becomes permanent. You would say, well, what about competitors? Competitors come in. Well, competitors have no incentive to compete with you anymore. And most innovation, most companies, startups in Silicon Valley, here in my yard, are made in order to be acquired. So the strategy, the typical strategy of young companies is to come up and be acquired. Now, obviously, there will be times at which this story that I'm describing doesn't hold. And that is when there's an innovation which is completely changes the whole world, like the innovation of electricity or artificial intelligence or steam engine. When a technology of that size comes in, then old firms and young firms and old firms are on the same footing. And then there is some competition. The competition is for a new position. And then the whole process that I described starts all over again. But at any moment of time, the economy becomes a monopoly. This is under the condition that the policy is a free market policy. The firms can do whatever they want. I'm talking about a policy based on the Adam Smith view of the world. Surely, alternative system is one in which the system is regulated from the very beginning, and strong antitrust prevents all of these strategies from being used. So there are these different kinds of capitalism. You can have capitalism, which is completely free market capitalism. And what I am proposing is that if you have a policy which is a free market capitalism, it will ultimately result in monopoly power. And that monopoly power will become a permanent fixture that will have political and economic ramifications. I'm sorry, you ask a hard question, I have to give you a long answer. I can't give you a simple answer.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. Professor, you draw a striking parallel between today and the first Gilded Age. What are the key similarities and critical differences between the monopolies of the 19th century and the tech giants of today?
For the practical thing, the practical answer from the point of view of monopoly power and concentration, I don't see much difference between them. The at the turn of the century, the Gilded Age, the first Gilded Age, that goes from the Civil War, 1865, to the First World War, 1914, was marked by the same kind of thing: highly concentrated innovations, high rate of innovations, high rate of industrialization, monopolizations of all industries, inequalities, drastic inequality, and very powerful social polarization. The same mechanism. The slight differences are, the two main differences are that in the first Gilded Age, monopolies were created openly. They created by creating trusts between 1895 and 1904. Some 2,000 companies were merged into 157 trusts. So each one of these trusts was basically a conglomeration of a lot of firms openly. And they thought of it as the act of God. This is the law of God. They thought about it as the law of nature. They were all they were believers in the theory, the crazy theory of eugenics, and saw themselves as superior humans who were destined to be the wealthy, who will be the powerful, who will be the leaders, and it's their job is to create strong companies that will not go bankrupt in a recession. What is the difference? The difference mostly is in the technology. That is the main difference. The technology of that age was the technology of assembly line. It's true the assembly line came late, 1903, but the assembly line is a thing that sort of characterizes the entire age afterwards. The assembly line had the unique feature that it replaced skilled workers with unskilled workers. Instead of skilled work, like the automobile, the original way they built automobiles is skilled workers would stand there and on one place assemble all the pieces one after the other. Ford understood that, and also understood it as well, that they need to simplify the procedure and make repetitive work fast to be the solution. And that is what they achieved. They achieved the creation, they created the blue-collar workers of America. This is the thing that created the middle class of the 20th century. It is not that workers who are the unskilled worker who did repetitive work fast and was well paid for that. In fact, was paid middle class income. The characterization of the technology today is exactly the opposite. It is exactly the technology that destroys the assembly line, which is destroys the blue collar workers, because the computer and the robot replaces these workers. So the gainers in the first Gilded Age was the unskilled workers. The unskilled workers were the gainers. They joined in, and they were strongly pro-democracy, because democracy was the thing that gave them the opportunity to have middle class income. Today, the unskilled workers are the loser ones. Unskilled workers are the majority of workers. So the majority of workers in America today are actually not gaining much from technology. Technology is destroying, to a large extent, their livelihood. This is the main difference, to my mind.
Professor, you argue that inequality, technology, culture, and policy interact to drive democratic decline. Can you walk us, our listeners, through how these three forces compound each other, and which one you consider the most dangerous?
You have a tendency to ask very big questions, and I'm forced to give you long answers. I can't give you a one-sentence answer. Okay, so let's take these. There are three questions here. So let me try to take them one at a time. Let me begin with the word policy. The policy that was adopted in the United States in 1980s by President Reagan was a free market policy. The United States made a very big change in direction of policy, and it was followed by many, many countries in the world follow the same thing. As I explained from the very basic principles that I just explained earlier about the creation of monopoly power, the adoption of free market policy to me means the United States began to march along a direct line towards allowing monopoly power to take over the markets. So the choice of free market policy in 1980 is a crucial component in the decline of democracy. Now, this policy enabled the complete destruction of the antitrust policy and gradual monopolization of virtually every section of the American economy, monopolization based on technology. The second component is technology. As I just said, the technology of computer robots that came about the same time. Apple comes to the market in 1976, and 1981 Microsoft appears, and all the technological development from 1980 on is the digital revolution. The digital revolution resulted in the full gradual destruction of the blue collar workers and essentially leaving workers without college education to be non-participant in the growth and rise of productivity of the last 50 years. So there's a second component. So technology is the second component. The third component, and by the way, as part of free market policy is also globalization. And globalization is another component that enables a large number of jobs to lose for workers to lose their jobs in the United States and for industries to move abroad. So globalization, free market policy, and technology together combine to destroy large segment of American manufacturing and cause a major decline in livelihood of workers without college education. Finally, the third component is culture. The culture that is important is that the Reagan Revolution was a bargain with the devil. You'll be free, and government goes out of your way. We'll take out all regulations, but you're responsible for your life. Whatever happens, you are responsible. This resulted in a society in which profits matter, selfishness is good, greed is good, and if you fail, it's your problem. So as a result of that, the United States considered all these workers, millions of workers who had lost their jobs, as their problems. They didn't. The intellectuals in America, the leaders of America, didn't think that these millions of workers is a problem for America. And these essentially were ignored. They were told, get some education, find some ways, and the market will take care of you. Well, it didn't. And when you combine all these together, democracy cannot survive. Because democracy cannot survive when a large segment of society is getting impoverished, with the rest are getting rich, and some becoming super billionaires. And we are telling the majority of workers to go and take care of themselves. And this is the source of where Trumpism comes up. Trump is just the accidental demagogue who comes along, who takes advantage of all that. And today, this is where we are today.
Professor, one of the most powerful argument in the book
Yeah,
is that,
you
sure,
asked me to judge which is the more important among them. I think that all of them are very important. I don't think that I would think that any one of them is more important than the other. I think all three of them, it's culture, technology, and policy, all of them together combined to cause the decline of democracy. And this is the core of the book.
yeah. Professor, one of the most powerful argument in the book is that technological competition does not eliminate market power. It makes it permanent. Could you explain why competition, which we assume to be the antidote, actually fails to correct monopoly concentration?
Well, but you can see it's not very difficult to see it from the previous discussion, because if you are a monopolist and you have you control the industry, you're rich, you're doing very well. Now, given the advantages that we just discussed, you already have scale, you already have all the information, you already own the technology, you already own the industry. So now comes a newcomer. Now, you have an option. Either you can compete with that, or what you want to do is you can, and if you compete and you win, you make $10 billion. $10 billion. But on the other hand, if he buys you out, you make only $5 billion. So would you take $5 billion for sure, or $10 billion with a chance of being lost completely? As a result of that, the fact is that this competition cannot work because you have no motive to compete. Moreover, it is legal. This is the point. This is legal to cooperate technologically. So lots of firms have joined projects. Virtually if you look at the scope of artificial intelligence companies, they're all interconnected. Microsoft is connected that open AI. Google is connected to Anthropic. NVIDIA is involved with all of them. They're all in the joint project. They're all talking to each other. There's at this time, it's a very mixed situation because remember, as artificial intelligence is one of these big industries, big innovations that does cause competition. I said that earlier. So this is a period in which you've got a slightly amount of competition among them to find out who is going to be on top. But in fact, outside of the competition, the small companies, if you look at the last 50 years of the digital evolution, thousands of companies existed between 1980 and today, and they all disappeared. Why? Because they were absorbed into these giants. Google, for example, has in it about 250 companies. Microsoft actually absorbed over 200 companies. In each one of these are empires. These are empires of technology. And they have many, many components, and they're in many different things. I mean, think about it. Google has a automobile driving, Waymo, and it has search, and it has YouTube, and all kinds of industries, all kinds of investments. But they are at the end the pillars of the American industry today. And the fact is that competition does not exist.
Professor, you distinguish between technologies that enhance human productivity and those designed to replace workers altogether. As AI accelerates, how do we ensure it empowers people rather than displace them? And who is responsible for making that choice?
Okay, this is part of a general principle that I'm advocating. It's more that I think it's important to understand. It's true that when you have an innovation like in electricity, as everybody uses it. Artificial intelligence. So, uh, artificial intelligence, you got Claude. Claude just is a smart mechanism answer your questions. But these ultimately are being used to build devices, to build a crane, or to build something. If you want to have an application in a legal business, you want to create a device that will be working in the legal area, then you will create a specific device. You will design a specific device for lawyers or a specific device for doctors or a specific device for engineers, because each field has its own complexities, and therefore you will need a specific application. Now, that specific application, there's many ways in which it can be designed. History has showed that, in fact, humans can choose a lot of different designs, and it doesn't take much imagination to imagine. But let's take an example of a doctor's office. You can have a device that sends in the office, and a patient comes in and says, I'm sick, I don't feel well. And you talk to the device. The device listens to it, makes a diagnosis, then spews out a prescription, go to the pharmacy, get some food, some medication, and the doctor's out of business. Why? Because the device replaced the doctor. But then you can do something else. You can have a device in which you don't, the device doesn't talk to the patient. The device talks to the nurse, only to the nurse. The nurse becomes a specialist who knows how to operate this device. And the device gives information that the nurse can understand. Now you come and talk to the nurse, and the nurse says, what's with you? And you give the information, the device hears it out, and the nurse decides to consult with the device, and together they come up with a conclusion of what your situation is, and they give you some remedy. Now, notice what happened in this moment. If the situation is difficult, then the nurse sends you to a doctor. Now the doctor has more time. In the first device, the doctor was out of job and there's no nurse at all. In the second device, the nurse is upskilled. The device upskilled the nurse. The doctor has more free time. The doctor can see more patients, and the productivity of the doctor increased. The productivity of the nurse increased. The income of the doctor increased. The income of the nurse increased. Medical cost is cheaper, and everybody is happy. But the device made them not be as profitable. So that is the choice. There is a choice in making that, in creating such devices. What I'm saying is, becomes very clear whether the device helps workers or replaces workers. If it helps workers, I think that we should subsidize it. We should give it 50% subsidy. If it replaces the workers, we'll put a tax on it. Because society has why do we need technology? What for? Unless it makes human beings live better, unless it gives human beings more opportunities for better life. Why have it? just to make some billionaire wealthy? Is that the whole purpose of technology? So it's not very difficult to understand. You ask me who will make the decision. Well, you can have a administrator make the decision, or you can have a board. You can have a committee making a decision if you want. I'm not an expert on organizations, but I don't consider it to be a very difficult question. The principle, once you adopt the principle, it becomes an all-encompassing. It becomes part of society, it becomes part of culture. And that is what I'm talking about. I'm talking about creating a culture in which we choose technologies that help people, not replace people.
Professor, you draw inspiration from policy models in Japan and Scandinavian countries. What specific element from those systems do you believe are transferable to the United States? And what would need to change for such a model to work in American context?
Oh, that's a very good question. Yes, I think I'm not proposing that the United States should become a socialist country. I'm not suggesting that. I'm not proposing anything of this sort. I'm proposing one. Well, I would say there are two principles involved here. Number one is the society has an obligation to maintain the livelihood of any worker who is being affected by technology or by anything which is supported by public policy. If public policy is in favor of something, and that something causes a destruction of the livelihood of somebody, society is responsible for that. And that is a principle that is enshrined in law. So it becomes a legal obligation. It's not a question of somebody's good heart. So principle number one to be taken from Scandinavia is to enshrine this principle in law. That's number one. Number two is to try to transform the unions to be more part of the solution of workers' morale and workers' self-esteem, instead of workers without college education being humiliated or pushed aside and ignored. Find ways to allow them to create unions again. In other words, abolish many of the laws that prevent the unionization, allow the unionization, but also regulate the unions so they don't get corrupted, and make sure that they act as social agents to provide services for workers. In some Scandinavian countries, unions, for example, handle unemployment compensation, something which is not done in the United States. And I'm not proposing that unions should pay the unemployment compensation in the United States, but rather to permit unionization, to encourage unionization, but to have the unions not into these corrupt organizations that we had in the past, in the 20th century, but rather create organizations that are very supportive of workers and provide services, social services, counseling services, and support workers altogether, holding their morale. So these two principles, I think, are copyable from Scandinavia, and I don't think that it will be a great revolution for America to adopt them. Number one, the first principle, which is the acknowledgement of the livelihood of workers, is something that already is found in some of the speeches of FDR. FDR already proposed some ideas along these lines. Congress rejected it in the past, but it's not. These are not completely brand new ideas that didn't exist before.
Professor, you propose a striking framework, taxing technologies that replace humans and subsidizing those that assist them. Is this politically feasible? And how would regulators draw that line in a world where the same technology can both help and displace?
Well, we just talked about that. This is a subject I just mentioned, the example of the doctor and the nurse. Um, I don't think that it's such a complicated problem to decide if a device that was used is replacing workers or is helping workers. A device that replacing workers is one that says go away. Workers are necessary somehow. Devices that are helping workers, um, workers will welcome because they're helping them, and they will help their productivity. They will help make them more productive and more efficient. The idea is to use technology to upskill people. You take people who don't have a college education and don't have any formal training, but you give them a device, and then suddenly they become upskilled. Their level of skill increases. They know that they are upskilled. They're happier. They're supporting it. They're not going to destroy the machines. They're not going to be Luddites again. They will be in favor of it. Right now, the American has a great deal of anxiety of the unemployment that artificial AI is going to cause. AI is going to cause a huge decline in employment in America. All kinds of predictions like that. But it's because we don't have a policy, because the government isn't there to establish a clear-cut guidance of what the purpose of the policy of that technology is. The technology is in the hands of the technologies. They do whatever they want today in America, and the outcome of that is, yes, then we'll have outcome that we may not like. But if you choose for the political system, for democracy to protect itself by insisting that technology should be one that supports democracy rather than obstruct it, then the situation is different. I don't think this question, it's very difficult to understand.
Professor, I would like to conclude this episode with one final question. Beyond policy, you urge individuals to act, to speak up, apply pressure, and upskill. For the everyday worker who feels powerless against the forces of big tech and rising inequality, what is the most meaningful step they can take today?
I think if you look at this, if what I have said, synthesize all what I've said, the worker has many options. Number one, to find ways of upskilling himself or herself, whether through a community college, whether it's by specialized courses, or by choosing some um, educational ways that are feasible for that person. I'm not saying that it's easy, because right now there's nobody to finance that. Under my scheme of, I propose the key proposal in the book is to introduce the guaranteed livelihood, which that guarantee consists of several steps. And that is, number one, some kind of counseling of deciding which direction the worker can go, where it's the most likely to have good employment opportunities, then be trained during training to receive wages, expenses covered, medical cost, tuition cost, children, daycare, moving cost, anything necessary, counseling, whatever necessary to enable the person to upskill themselves. It's according to my proposal. However, in addition to that, I think being active, joining a union, supporting unions, active in politics, and be aware of voting for the person who will ultimately help you. Trump is a very good example of a demagogue who many workers support, and there's no hope at all that Trump will help them. So there's no point supporting Trump. Workers should find other representatives can represent their interest better. And if every worker will do that, America will move forward. The world will be better.
Professor Mordecai Kurz, thank you for sharing such a rigorous and urgent perspective on the future of capitalism and democracy. Your work reminds us that technology and policy are not forces we simply endure, but choice we shape, and that the health of our democratic institutions depend on getting that balance right. To our listeners, thank you for tuning in to Business Talk. If today's conversation made you think differently about power, technology, and the economy we are building, we encourage you to pick up a copy of Professor Kurz's book, Private, Power, and Democracy's Decline, for a deeper dive into these ideas. Thank you so much, Professor Kurz, for joining us today.
Thank you.